give a talk tonight on how to get published, and particularly in clinical journals, because that's my expertise. And this is particularly focused on beginners. So it's kind of a compendium of everything that I wish that people had told me when I got started, that I've only found out a bit later along the way. So I work at Leeds. I'm an associate professor in rheumatology and an honorary consultant rheumatologist. So along the way, I've sort of published quite a few things in clinical journals. But how I originally got into writing things was I was very lucky to, at quite an early stage, so I qualified in 1999 as a doctor, and then the thing that really helped me actually was when I decided that I was going to do a course on Introduction to the Humanities in 2002, because I'd done my MRCP and I was wondering what to do next. And that was amazing, because that, for the first time since GCSE, I was writing essays and I was getting feedback on the essays. Talking of feedback, everyone mute their microphones, please, thank you. So that was very, very helpful in just terms of writing in general. And the skill of writing is transferable. If you write well in one context, then those skills will help you in writing for other contexts. And then I went and did a clinical fellow rheumatology job at Northwick Park Hospital, and Dr. Andrew Keat decided he was going to teach me how to write. So we had an article and we had a weekly meeting, and he would sit down, and there were lots of crossings out and about what I'd written, but he would explain why he'd crossed things out and what he was suggesting and how he was suggesting to improve the writing. And that was really useful for me in getting into writing for the biomedical literature. And then when I came to Leeds, Professor Paul Emery kindly invited me to write a textbook chapter with him. And again, that then involved a lot of feedback, not just from him and my co-authors, but from the peer reviewers, who provided quite a lot of feedback from that textbook, more than we would have, I think, from a journal article. And that was also quite helpful too. And then since then, I have been involved in quite big writing projects with collaborative working groups and guideline groups. And then latterly, I've been had a role as associate editor for the journal Rheumatology, which involves handling manuscripts. So authors submit them in, so I allocate them to reviewers or not, depending on whether they need to go to review. And then I may accept, reject decisions in collaboration with the editor-in-chief. So why do all of this in the first place? So, well, the first thing to say is that if you have learned something, or you want to learn something, then rather than someone else reinventing the wheel, it's great to be able to pass that learning along to others. And it's quite satisfying to be able to do that. Secondly, just the process of researching a topic teaches you so much, and you may well end up being the local expert on this topic, because that in-depth researching and reading about something is something that then you then have that knowledge, and that's unique to you, and that becomes an asset that you have as a professional. Writing, as I indicated before, can be a really great opportunity to get feedback on your writing skills from more experienced people, and this can help you improve fast. Fourthly, for those interested in the academic track, publications, let's face it, are just academic currency. They get counted on applications for fellowships, they get counted on your CV, they get published for any academic thing. People look at your publications, and this is particularly true for any academic training post or any funded research fellowship. Once you are published, you become part of the international research community. You might even get invited to give talks at conferences, so that's quite fun. And number 6, locally, you do learn quite a lot about your co-authors, which can be an amazing privilege, or alternatively, you may decide you don't want to co-author with them again. Either way, it's a very good way of learning more about the people that you work with. So in terms of questions and answers, we will have some questions and answers at the end. You may post questions in the chat, but while I'm presenting these slides, I can't see them, so I won't be able to answer them on the fly. So we'll just make sure that we do leave plenty of time at the end so that I can answer a few questions, and Carol will moderate on that. But please do ask your questions, and we can discuss them. So when to start writing? Well, the time to start is now. And one reason is it can take a very long time for articles to appear in print. If you do have a look at the sort of journal you're aiming for and the article type, you may find that the published articles are time-stamped with the date of submission, the date of acceptance, and the date of publication. And there can be a year, 2 years sometimes between submission, acceptance, publication along that process. So some authors, it's an advantage. So while the full article is being considered for publication, they have the opportunity to submit the abstract of their article to several scientific conferences and present the data before it's even published, and that's fine. Once it's accepted, then submit it to a scientific conference. However, if you actually need something published, something like you should probably go for something with a faster turnaround time, or consider submitting a preprint, which I'll talk about later. So the next thing to understand is not all journals are created equal. So the traditional journal published mainly original research. So traditionally, you have to pay to get those to access those articles as a reader, unless your institution has a deal, the library has a deal with a publisher, but whereby used via your institution, you can get access to that article. If you work at the trust, you may get access to some articles. If you work for the university, you'll get access to most articles, but not all. Other increasingly open access articles, which are free to read, are being published, and then some journals publish some paywalled articles, some open access articles, so those are called hybrid journals. Each journal is published by a publisher, and usually each publisher publishes between 1 and several hundred different journals. And publishers may be massive international corporations that exist for profit, or they may be very small outfits run by learned societies, which may be clinical societies or just scientific societies. There are some journals which only produce review articles, so they're more like scientific magazines. And one example is the Nature reviews in something or other series. So they can be quite highly cited and quite high profile, but they don't publish original research. Some journals only publish one particular thing, such as case report journals. These are usually obvious from the title, but not always. There are some journals that are frankly predatory. So not all pay-to-publish journals are predatory, but a subset of them are. So the predatory ones are the ones which charge large amounts of fees and then do little or no peer review and will print it whatever. So they don't really have that due process, and sometimes their turnaround time can be extremely fast. So within a few days or weeks, and it's up on the website and they charge you this massive amount of money. So usually this is obvious from the website, but there can be a bit of a thin line, and there are some publishers who traditionally have been seen as a bit dodgy. So this is something to discuss with other people that have done this before. And there are also things which are just not journals. So they might be news outlets, or they might be websites, or they might be someone's blog, and that's fine, but they're not peer reviewed and they're not journals, and they're not indexed on Medline, for example, PubMed. So just be careful that the thing that you're aiming at is actually a journal and is a decent scientific journal that does have peer review. So for fellowships and CV, your academic currency, original research is where it's at. So that is the thing that makes most of a difference. It will generally require research ethics, however. So if you're aiming at a very quick publication, that adds extra time and is extra work. And this kind of original research could be clinical data, it could be basic science, it could be systematic review and meta-analysis. And sometimes there's two options for journals. They may have concise report, which is a slightly shorter version, versus an extended report. The only real difference from that is length. The quality of each that is required for publication is the same. It really depends on how much work is in there and whether you can get it down to whatever 1,500 words and 2 tables or figures, or whatever the concise report requirements are. You can even, sometimes there's too much even to put in the extended report, and then we have something called supplementary data, which is sort of an online appendix. You can also get your name in the scientific literature by making a rapid response to a recently published article, doing clinical images, clinical vignettes, writing case reports or letters to the editor. And case reports are quite a nice place to start if you're a clinician who's a beginner that's wanting to start to write case reports. They are original publications, and they are useful for counting towards PhD applications and things like that. There are some sort of review type articles, so narrative reviews, perspectives and viewpoints, as opposed to the systematic review, which is original research. Narrative reviews are more opinion. So these are nice, and they can get you a lot of exposure. It's only worth it if people are going to read them. So you just kind of have to be a bit careful about what you write about and who you write about it with. So authorship, there are guidelines on this. So this is International Council of Medical Journal Editors, and these are their criteria for authorship. So what follows from this is if you want someone to co-author your article, then you need to invite them early and give them the chance to make that substantial contribution. So it is a mistake to try to bring people in at the last minute, because they don't then have the opportunity to make that contribution. It is the accountability of part of it is important. So everybody that's an author needs to be very happy and agree with everything that is being written and submitted for publication, and be able to vouch for the integrity of whatever their contribution is to that research. So if you're a beginner, it's really great to have your own ideas and be the first author. It looks impressive. It is quite impressive. And that's because you, as the first author, do the vast majority of researching and writing, as well as the very annoying fiddly bits of the journal submission website. The first author also has the joy of doing the referencing, for which I strongly recommend you use a reference management program such as EndNote or Mendeley or something else. The thing about being middle author and getting in on someone else's publication is nobody really knows what they have contributed beyond the absolute minimal on the journal editor guidance for authorship. So it's okay to be a middle author, but I think in terms of learning and also in terms of showcasing what you can do, it is best to be a first author if you can. So for original research, you start with a research question, write down your research question at an early stage. You may need to refine it as you go along. The question does have to be something the readers of that journal will care about. The answer to that question that you come up with is almost never the complete answer to that question, but if it gets us some way towards answering the question, that's okay. I want to put in here a warning about data. If you're going to work with data and you're not very experienced, please ask someone. Make sure all your variables are defined and documented. Keep it secure, anonymize where possible, and use version control. It is very easy to go very wrong in Microsoft Excel. Be careful, take advice, and we probably ought to do a whole other seminar on this. So back to the writing part of it. Co-authors are really important, particularly if you're a beginner, and ideally you want somebody who has got deep expertise in the topic, so clinical expertise. And it's good to have somebody with sufficient expertise in the methods you're using. So these people might be the same person, or they might not be. They don't necessarily have to work at your institution. It is useful if they have published a lot in the sort of journal you're aiming for. It is also useful if they get on with each other. Partly because of the previous point, too many co-authors is generally not helpful, but sometimes it's inevitable. And it's important to think for yourself. If you want someone to coach you, so give you feedback and help you improve on your writing with all that sort of crossing out and suggesting of new things and different ways of saying the same thing, then really that is quite a lot of work for someone else, for your co-author. So check in advance that they are prepared to do this and agree ground rules as to how they're going to do it, turnaround times. Do not assume that they will do this just because they're co-authoring. You really need to have that conversation up front. So when you're working with your co-authors, consider having a meeting or teleconference right at the start, discuss where you are, what stage you are at the moment, talk about the journal you're aiming for and the article type. So are you going for the concise report, extended report, or what? It's important to have a discussion up front about this issue of paying. So open access are free to the reader, but usually the person submitting the article, the authors, pay. Whereas a paywalled article, the readers have to pay to access it, but often the people who write it don't have to pay to submit it. So it's a who pays kind of question. So if it's going to be an open access article or in an open access journal, somebody from your side is going to have to probably pay some money to the journal. So there are funds in existence for this, and who that fund, whether you can access those funds depends a lot on who is funding your research. If you're doing research, it's important. The landscape of this varies a lot between different co-authors, but talk to your co-authors about what options there are for paying submission fees. Talk about how you're going to manage drafts of the article. So one option is to have a session of Word documents, which you email back and forth. In that case, you have to do strict version control and tracking of changes, because multiple electronic versions, particularly when there are lots of people, can get very confusing. Sort of there are collaborative writing tools like Google Documents and other sort of cloud-based solutions where you can all work on the article at the same time, and that can work well for some people. Some people don't like Google Documents because things vanish before your eyes. So again, it has to be with agreement of all the co-authors. There are places you can leave on the cloud your articles, so OneDrive or Dropbox, but some people can't access them from their work computers. So again, talk about what works for everybody. Give your co-authors a reasonable amount of time to comment on drafts, but do set a deadline for responses. And when you write emails to your co-authors, please write them very short and clear with a required action. Be clear about the time frame you're expecting, which needs to be reasonable, and making clear in the subject line what you want from them. If you write "Dear all," this sometimes does not go well. Researching and note taking. So the first thing to do is to do a very quick search initially. So use PubMed, Google Scholar to see who's written on the same topic, but then go into more and more depth. When you're making notes in your reading, do be careful to distinguish between what others have said and what you have thought. And this is really important because you may end up accidentally plagiarizing people, because you might forget whether this thing that you've written down was your own brilliant thought or actually what someone else has thought. So really try and be careful about that, because plagiarism is quite a serious academic offence. And you need to make sure that what you submit is actually your own work and that of your co-authors, and not copyright of someone else. When you're reading and making notes, add in the citation so you can find it later. And I can recommend the browser plugin called CoCites, which is a plugin that goes into PubMed and will find you articles with a similar citation profile. So it's worth seeing if that works for you in your field. How to write it. So this applies to whatever you're writing. So it might be a blog post, it might be a magazine article, or it might be a scientific article. So you start with assembling your material, read around the topic, you make notes, you chase down new ideas, you read some more, and you read, and that takes time. And then you do your write. And this probably only takes about 15% of the entire time of this whole writing process. And you write your first draft and get your first draft into some shape, and then you start the revision process. And typically something will go through multiple rounds of revision. At some point you get a bit too close to the text, so sometimes tricks that can help will be to print it out in different font or with different formatting or spacing, and put it away for 24 hours and come back to it and go, oh, I didn't realise I wrote that. That's silly, I will revise that. Send it round to your co-authors after a couple of rounds of your revisions, revise it again. Always proofread it one final time before submission. And in that process, you're writing, hopefully the feedback from your co-authors will help you improve the way that you write. And if you haven't seen it, there's an essay called Politics in the English Language, written by George Orwell, which is really, really good. It's written about a different kind of writing, not academic writing, but many of the pieces of advice in there are very applicable to people who want to write clearly for any audience. And in the end, it's much more important to be clear and to be understood than to try and be fancy and obfuscate. You want people to actually understand your thoughts, because that's what you're trying to put across. When you're writing the paper, another rookie error is to start at the beginning of the paper and go through all the way to the end and then stop. So don't do that. You've got your research question first and plan, and then you've got your data analysis. But even before you analyze your data, you need to plan your methods out first. And for some research types, for example, systematic reviews, you do need to pre-register your protocol before you actually start work at all on your data. And then you assemble your data and you analyze it. So with the benefit of your data that you've analysed, you then write your methods alongside your results. So you then update the literature review and you write the introduction and discussion. And I would recommend writing the abstract and the title last, not only because the format may be journal specific, but because that kind of stepping back and having an overview of what you've written sometimes is easiest to do at the end when you've got everything and you've got all your thoughts down into one document, and you can think about how you want your readers to approach your paper. There's a title page which you will also need to write when you submit the manuscript, and this is often very journal specific in terms of its formatting, so you should definitely decide on the journal before you start writing the title page. So the title page has things like the title, all the authors, the places where they work, and then other journal specific things like your word count or your conflicts of interest or all sorts of things like that. The abstract tables and figures are really, really important. This is things the reviewers go to first. The abstracts need to be concise, impactful, give the key numbers and key scientific ideas, and really think about what the take-home messages from your article. Some journals also encourage visual or graphical or video abstracts, so go for it if you want to do that. It's often they will just ask that after the acceptance of the manuscript rather than at the initial submission stage. But the linchpin of your article, if it's an original research article, are those tables and figures, so spend time on those. And ideally prepare these before writing a lot of words, or at least write the methods first alongside, and then don't spend lots and lots of time writing introduction and discussion before you've got your tables and figures absolutely right. So how to choose a journal. So I've talked about this a little bit already. The first thing is think about the publisher type. So are they a reputable publisher? So either a big publishing house or a society journal. Those are good ones to go for. There's something called a journal impact factor, which essentially counts the number of citations its papers have had in the 2 years following publication. So in general, journals that have a higher impact factor, their articles get cited more, i.e. more people read them. So I think this was originally developed as a way to decide how much to charge to advertisers, but it's also used as a kind of proxy for like how good, in terms of how good articles have to be accepted by that journal. And in general, a high impact factor, it's hard to get your article into that high impact factor journal. That people are trying to really sort of track back from that and focus on the quality of the research itself when they're evaluating research. But it can be a sort of quick guide to where you think your article is positioned in the marketplace of academia, if you like. Alt metrics are a kind of, so they're like social media type metrics, so how much articles get tweeted, how much they get into news outlets, a little bit about citations as well. And you can sometimes look at the alt metrics of articles, but I think that's really kind of an emerging discipline, and perhaps not the most important thing when making your decisions. Open access versus paywall is important. Talk to your co-authors in an early stage about this, because A, it involves money, and B, some funders actually require that everything that gets counted, or for REF, the Research Excellence Framework, everything that gets counted for REF may need to be open access. So consider this carefully. Try and avoid any predatory journal, so particularly any journal that spam emails you saying, please submit an article to our journal. I think generally those ought to be avoided. On the journal website, look carefully for the part of the website about fees, article processing fees and submission fees. They can be small or they can be substantial, so talk to your co-authors about the actual sums of money required. If the fees are payable, is there a fund to pay them? If in doubt, go for a more well-known journal. So some people also submit a preprint before they submit their full article. So this is a non-peer reviewed publication that you just put online on a server, and medRxiv is one of those. These are increasingly used. Just check with the co-authors everyone's happy with that, because not everyone is happy with that. And also some journals may say that they won't take things that have been preprints before, although in fact increasingly most of them do. This can be an option if you really need to get something published and it's taking a long time with journals. Sometimes a preprint is useful for that. So journal manuscript submission portals. So these are often quite antiquated looking websites like from the 1990s, although they're much better than they used to be. And some of them are a bit more clunky than others. somewhere within the journal website there will be instructions to authors, so read these really carefully, because someone has written them to try and avoid you having lots of auto unsubmissions and resubmissions. So if you don't comply with the instructions to authors, for example, if you attach the wrong kind of file in the wrong kind of place, then somebody on the journal staff will unsubmit it and send it back to you, and nobody will sort of evaluate it for scientific content. It won't go to the editors until it's passed through those hurdles. So as you're writing this and preparing your title page, double and triple check everything the journal website and the submission portal wants to know about the co-authors. So sometimes this can be their degrees, their titles, their institution, their funding, conflicts of interest, and something called a contributorship statement. So you need to go to your co-authors and check that what you've got on that then is accurate, and collate this and make sure it's correct. It will also be checked at the proof stage, but you want to get it right before that point. There are sections like funding, disclosures, conflicts of interest. It's important to have a title page. There may be an acknowledgement section. References are usually part of the article you're submitting, but sometimes they want it as a separate document. Most submission portals also require or optionally let you upload a covering letter. Opinions differ as to whether it's worth spending much time on the covering letter or whether the editors actually read them. I think this may depend on the journal and the field. You may well be asked to suggest reviewers with expertise who would be suitable to review your article. And actually, you are a good person to suggest this because you'll probably have come across their papers in your reading and you may well have cited them. If you obviously pick your friends or your co-authors' friends, the journal's probably not going to invite them to be reviewers, and they don't always. They tend not to invite only the people that you've suggested them. They will also find some people themselves to review as well. But it is worth suggesting one or two people to review. So to make sure that you do get a fair review, that it's someone who actually has expertise in the topic you're doing. You may also be asked to say what reviewers you don't want to review your paper. And it is almost always best not to write any names here, but sometimes you have to talk to your co-authors about this. So when you submit your article, you then wait. And then there are various outcomes of your submission. So one thing is called desk rejection, which is where your article gets looked at by the associate editor or editor, and it gets sent back to you saying, you know, we have not sent this out for peer review, we're very sorry. And often the reason is actually because it's out of scope for the journal. So they don't think that it's what their readers are wanting from that journal. Sometimes it's because the length is out of proportion to the level of interest of that readership. So they may send it back to you and say, well, I'm sorry, this is very long, but if you were to submit it as a concise report, we might consider it. You should never take this personally, desk rejection, because it often is not to do with the article quality, but it's about that scope of the journal. They may have a reject and transfer where they say we cannot accept this, but you may wish to consider submitting it to our sister journal, and we'll transfer the reviews across if there are any reviews. The sister journal is usually open access with fees attached. So again, discuss with co-authors about those fees. They may also have sent it out to review, or sometimes not, but usually they have, and they may then give you back the reviewer's comments together with a minor revision, request for minor revision. So usually that's with a turnaround of a few weeks, and those tend to be just minor comments, or it may be major revision, which sometimes is framed as a revise and resubmit. So they unsubmit it for you. They do not guarantee they will publish it, but if they're inviting you to resubmit, then that's what usually a major revision, and it's worth actually resubmitting if you're invited to revise and resubmit. And then there's straight accept, which rarely happens the first time round, but you hope when you resubmit it, they will then accept at that time. So when you get the email, everything except accept is framed like a rejection. But if you are invited to submit a revised version, then your chances of some subsequent acceptance are probably quite high. For some journals, around 50%. But whether you actually do get it accepted second time around depends on how well you address the comments of the reviewers and the editor. So it's important to respond to them well. Reviewers are often anonymous, sometimes they are not. So take all the comments seriously. don't just try and flatter or mollify or agree with them just to get accepted, because it would be really obvious. And just, you know, stand up for what you think. If you think you're right, then, you know, make that argument. But don't nitpick what they say or go off topic. You aren't reviewing them. They're, you know, and they're doing this unpaid. So there may be some, you know, grammatical errors, or they may have said something in a slightly clunky way. So don't go after them just because of that. Just try and take their reviews as constructive comments. There's something called the Breakspear method on Twitter, which is quite helpful for a point-by-point rebuttal of the reviewer's points. But yes, just try and be respectful. Even if you don't think they're being very respectful, try and be respectful. Assume they're being constructive, and you know, if what they say is really problematic, you can go to the editor and mention it to the editor. But you will find that the length and the detail of reviews may vary, and this is particularly the case where reviewers are unpaid. So hopefully after all this, you get this accepted by your journal, and if not by your first journal, then by the second journal that you send it to instead. So when the article is accepted, you will need to turn over copyright to the publisher. So they will send you a copyright license, read this, but you need to accept that term and assign that copyright to the publisher, otherwise it can't go in the journal. There will also be a page proofs where somebody in the journal offices has typeset your article into the format of their journal, and in the process they often change things or decide that your sentence would be better written in a different way. So check very carefully what they have done. They will usually highlight where they've made corrections and put a note to say, is this okay? Sometimes there's a bit of a mess up with the co-authors, like names or affiliations, so double check, triple check those too. They can ask for a 48-hour turnaround sometimes on page proofs. So if you're going to be away on holiday, then you can say that to the journal. But usually they want that turned around quite fast, because they want to get it in, once they've got it typeset, they want it, you know, off the production line and into that print queue as soon as possible. So check the journal policy, because often they will, once it's accepted, they will embargo it until the publication date. So they don't want you to share that anywhere until the article is formally published. You may need to update your institutional repository if that's relevant to you. And once it does get finally published, make a plan as to how you want to publicise it and get it noticed. So think about Twitter, think about LinkedIn, think about your email signature file. And then finally, sort of reflect back again on the process. And often, as your reviewers may very kindly point out, your article may raise sort of bigger questions than it solves. So is there any way you could gather data to follow up on those questions? And that's when your next research project starts. So I'm now going to unshare my screen and ask if anybody has any questions.
Sarah, that was an amazing presentation. Thank you very much. A lot of information in there. I've just looked in the chat. There's no questions currently at the moment. Scott, I saw your hand up was earlier. Scott, do you have a question? Oh, Daniela has got her hand up at the moment. Daniela, would you like to ask a question?
Hi there. Yes, thank you, Sarah, for that. It was very interesting. I have a question about kind of etiquette in terms of paying that fee that you were mentioning. Obviously, you know, sometimes there are those situations where you have, for example, students or colleagues, and you're co-authoring, and there is no guidance really about who should pay that fee. So what are your thoughts around it? Is it always the first author, or should it be equally shared? I mean, obviously, when it's students' work, I obviously don't ask my students to pay any fee, but yeah, when it's co-authors, do you think it should be equally shared, or it should be maybe the most expert member or the first author that takes on the fee?
Okay, so the first thing to say is do not ever pay this off your personal credit card or reach into your own pocket for publication fees. That is not how science is supposed to work. And in general, if the first author is an early career researcher, they should not be asked to find that money for those fees. So this is why you need to have these conversations very early and upfront. And in general, as I see it, and in terms of the etiquette of the places I've worked with, it is the responsibility of the senior author to find the money for those, for those open access fees. And if they can't find any money at all, then maybe there needs to be a conversation about whether it should go to a journal which charges submission fees, because if no one can pay them, it's not fair to then submit to that article, and then the journal starts sending you sometimes quite unpleasant. I've had unpleasant chasing emails about, we require your credit card details immediately, please. And that can get very difficult. So be absolutely solid sure that everybody knows who the senior author is, and that's the person who takes overall responsibility for the article. They may also be the corresponding author. That is up to that person to make a decision about what happens with the fees, because it can be quite a lot of money. It can be several £1,000s. So it's not trivial. It must be discussed as soon as you're saying, will you co-author this with me? We're thinking of submitting it to this journal. And what's the position on open access? Because it may be that that author is required to publish everything they do open access, or the people who are supported by particular funders may be required to publish everything open access. For the ref, there may be requirements to publish open access. But then, so there are various funding streams that can be accessed, but you must never be shy about talking about the money right up front. Together, as soon as you get people on board with, we're going to write this, we're going to do this, there needs to be a conversation about open access fees. Are we going to pay them? And if so, how, will the senior author commit to finding a way to make sure those are paid?
Thank you. Yeah, that was very clear. Thanks, Sarah.
That's great. Also, Daniela, a lot of funders will actually pay the open access fee if you ask them. So I've got a grant, for example, with Yorkshire Cancer Research, and they don't put fees into the actual grant application. But if we have something submitted, then I just need to fill in their template form, and then they will pay for the publishing fees, because ultimately they've paid for my research and they want my research to be shared with the community. So it's in their best interest as well for the research to be published. So funders do pay for publishing as well.
But if you go to NIHR, they expect you to write it into your grant. From the get-go, they don't suddenly go, oh yeah, have a few extra couple of thousand, that's fine. No, you get what you get, and you have to ask for it up front. For MRC, then there's a fund that you can use for MRC Welcome. Various charities have agreements and there are funds via the university. So it does depend on the funding. But if it's unfunded, then you then have a discussion about, okay, so what are we going to do about this open access thing? So I think that some very, very high impact journals like Nature Cell, they now charging about £9,000 for articles that are accepted. So it's not a small amount of money, and that you may not be publishing in Nature Cell as an early career researcher, but there are some quite expensive journals that you just need to be aware of this whole thing.
Perfect. So we're going to move on to the next question. So from Lynn, can you explain again about presenting at conferences and meetings? Do you suggest presenting before publication or publication before presenting?
So this depends quite a lot on your field. It depends on you, where you are in your career, what you think you're going to get out of the presentation. So this is something to have a good conversation with your co-authors with at an early stage. So there are advantages to presenting at a conference before publishing. So you may present at a conference before you've even written the paper, and often that the feedback that you get from conference attendees can really help improve the quality of your paper. And if they're impressed by your paper at the conference, then if they're then asked to review it later on, then they may be happy to see it because they've seen it before and they kind of feel they've so that can be quite nice to do it that way. You can also submit while you have a manuscript that's under consideration by a journal but has not yet been accepted. You may submit that to the abstract to a scientific conference, and and sometimes you get to present it before the article is even accepted for publication, or it may be accepted while it's being considered at the conference. So it has to be not accepted at the time of the abstract submission deadline in order to be okay to present, because otherwise there are sort of copyright issues once that has been accepted. So so that can be quite useful as well for the same reasons. It can, you know, help you get through peer review process. You can get some really great feedback that you can sometimes incorporate into a revised version. It's nice to go to conferences, it's nice to meet people, it's nice to showcase your work verbally and get extra impact, so that's all good. If your work is very secret and exciting and you don't want someone else to scoop you, your co-authors may say, oh no, don't tell anyone about what you're doing. Don't present it at a conference. Someone might do, you know, someone might steal your idea and scoop you. So rarely is this actually a serious concern, but it can happen. So occasionally, so that's something to be cautious about. You can't, once you have an article accepted for publication, you can't then submit the abstract to a conference, because that would violate the copyright rule, because you have just transferred the copyright to the journal, and so you cannot then submit that to a conference because you don't own that copyright anymore. Until you've had it accepted by the journal, you own the copyright, and so you can submit it to a conference. This is slightly field specific, so sort of check with people who know the conferences and know the meetings and, you know the journals, and the helpfulness of the feedback you get from a conference may be conference specific. So there may be some conferences where you get a bit more helpful feedback than other conferences, and sometimes the massive mega conferences, which are absolutely huge, you might not, you might never bump into the person who gives you good feedback, but sometimes smaller conferences, like about 200 people, can be really, really great for getting ideas about, oh, have you thought about analysing your data this way? Have you thought about this? Or what about that paper someone else wrote? Other people will always come up with things, and it's often good to hear about them informally from someone else at the conference, rather than some reviewer come up with it, the criticism, and use that as a reason for your paper not to be accepted. So yes, again, it's something the senior author probably has the final say on. So it sort of depends on the attitude of that person who has agreed to take on that senior author role. All right, we have another question about resolving conflict regarding order of authors on a paper. So this can get really, really sticky, and it can be really, really difficult. Clearly, the best position to be in is where you've had that very early teleconference. You've agreed up front who's going to be the senior author, who's going to be the first author, who's going to have other roles, who's going to contribute what, and perhaps what order they're going to go in. So when you document that initial meeting, you may have a suggested authorship order, and if someone's not happy about it, then they can sort of fight it out with the senior author or amongst themselves. It's very difficult as a first author to get drawn into middle author disagreements. It's very difficult if you think you should be the first author, but someone else thinks they should be the first author. Do you then go joint first authors, or how do you resolve that? And I think at the end of the day, the senior author should resolve disputes between first authors or people who think they ought to be first authors. If the senior author starts getting into fights, then you are in difficulty, because there's a power dynamic and a power relationship, so it can get very difficult. So this is again why it is good to just check at the start that everyone gets on with each other, that nobody has a history of falling out with other people over authorships, and if there are any problems, then spot them in advance. Really try and have an open meeting where everyone gets to say their thing, document what's been said. The end of the day, if people can't agree on the order of the authorship, then maybe the paper can't be submitted, because every author has to agree on this paper as it gets submitted, and then effectively, if people disagree on the order of authorship, that can block publication of the research, which is, if you've got research you need to get out, that's unethical, because you need to tell the scientific community about what you've been doing. So so it can be very problematic, and I think the best thing is to not take it all on yourself as a first author, if that's you, and to just try and get everyone into having an open and honest conversation at early stage, document everything. If there are issues, maybe that paper is dead, and another paper gets written, that will be the ultimate, the ultimate bad outcome for everybody. So there's a bit of gamesmanship in there, because everyone wants the paper to come out, and if they're fighting over order of authorship, they probably quite like the paper and they quite like the work, so it's in everyone's interest that it gets published, but they also have to agree about the authorship order. And then so often the senior author, if they're experienced, can broker deals or can agree on sort of shared credit. And sometimes alphabetical order has been used, particularly in some fields, such as social sciences. Alphabetical order is actually the standard, and everyone just goes alphabetical. And I've done, in large authorship groups, I have used alphabetical order where I really don't know. I have no way in judging who's contributed more than someone else. So it's alphabetical, but if it's a big list of people, it's really obvious that it's alphabetical. And it doesn't necessarily mean people have had a falling out. It's just that everyone's agreed to go alphabetical, and that's fine too. So that is another strategy for if you've got a lot of authors and they're all quibbling about, like, oh, I contributed slightly more than that person, but slightly, that person contributed slightly more than that other person over there. That can be another solution. But this is advanced negotiation tactics sometimes come in. So ask for help if it's all getting a bit difficult. All right. I have another question about input or help on data analysis. It is really important that your research, if it involves data analysis, has got somebody on the team with the expertise to do the data analysis. So you may be a beginner, you may be learning how to do it, but if you're trying to teach yourself and you have absolutely no support from someone else, that's not great. So that person who helps with the data analysis would normally be a co-author on the paper because they've contributed, unless they say, no, I don't need to be. I give you this small piece of advice. It's really trivial. I don't need to be, you can put me in acknowledgements, or you don't have to acknowledge me. But they should, I think if they've contributed substantially, then they would generally be offered co-authorship because they've put something of themselves into that work. It is great to include statistician on grants if you can, because we don't have enough statisticians. We need more statisticians. It's really hard to find statisticians who have half a spare minute in their week. They are incredibly busy people. So take all the statistical advice you can get. Make sure that if you want to sort of, particular sort of data analysis, just check that the person that you've got on your team is happy advising on that particular type of analysis. And talk to the senior authors as well. So if you feel that there's something that needs to be done that you don't have the expertise or training to do by yourself, then sometimes your senior author can help broker some kind of deal or find a statistician or data analyst or someone with the expertise to support you with that analysis. So this can be difficult, but it's well worth it, and you then learn as well. That I think is something to discuss at the earliest stage possible, as if you think you're going to need some analysis that is beyond what you've been trained to do, then seek advice early and make sure there's someone on the team who can do that. All right. Oh, we have a question from Carol. Questions about quality versus quantity of publications, particularly when working up a fellowship application. So I guess what is publication quality? So some people would say that original research ranks far above any other sort of research. So original research ranks far above a review article, say. And that is true when you are making an application for a research fellowship, because original research shows that you have the skills to do research, and you can write, whereas a review article shows that you have the skills to read about research and think about research and write, but doesn't necessarily mean you can do it yourself. So, if in doubt, something that showcases all the skills you have is better if at all possible. And so, and in terms of quality of manuscripts, if that showcases that in a good light, so if your analysis is really good, if you've written it up in a really robust way and which has been really, really clear and other people found it helpful, it's really useful too. And people get hung up on journal impact factors, but that's probably less important. What's more important is what that research shows about what you can do. Having said that, if you've written a review that's been sort of really amazing, really influential, and you have written that in your words, and you were the first author and you pushed that through, then that does say something about your ability not only to write and read and organise thoughts, but also your ability to marshal co-authors and to do some of this, you know, some of these slightly softer skills in terms of manuscript preparation and working in teams. So that can be useful. What I would caution against is putting lots and lots of letters in, or lots and lots of conference presentations which aren't necessarily proper publications, or double counting. So something that's gone in as a conference presentation, you can't then count that twice, or you then put in the manuscript, the full publication. That, you know, conference presentations, they don't really count as you know, that. And so I would always try and have at least one thing that showcases what you can actually do. If you have some extra things, like particularly case reports are quite good, because you are reporting something original within that. And yeah, if you've got some letters, put them in. If you've got a narrative review, put it in. Particularly if you have done all the writing of that and that is all your work, and particularly if it's relevant to the topic of your application, then put it in. But I think the priority should be on showcasing your skills, and people who are reviewing your application may well go and look at what you've written and use that to gauge, you know, what you can do and where your skills are. So they don't assume they're just going to count up the number of things in the box and then just move on. They tend to scrutinise that part quite carefully. Sometimes for that reason, it's better to have something published no matter where. So this is where we sometimes get preprints out, because if you think the thing that you're trying to get published is actually your best work, it showcases what you do really well, but it's being considered by a journal, they're being a bit slow and it's still in review, then sometimes if you can get that preprint out, then the reviewers can read the preprint and make their own judgment about the quality. And I think that quality, what you can do, is the most important thing for a fellowship application. So it's a little bit field specific, it's a little bit topic specific. Talk to your supervisor and your co-authors, and general, you know, writing is good, but try and get original research out if you can. All right, are there any more questions?
Thank you, Sarah. I didn't mean to throw you a curveball by putting my question in, but I get asked that so many times, and it's interesting to hear other people's opinions. And I think especially as you are starting on that journey and starting to try to build up your own portfolio. And yeah, thank you for that valuable advice. So if there are no more questions, then I am going to close tonight's session. I'm going to oh, that's just a thank you. That's great. Sarah, thank you so much for such an informative presentation and informative and insightful replies to some of the questions. I think, you know, publication is the end of the cycle of doing the research, and yes, getting the grant's really difficult, but actually that publication is also very difficult, and trying to finish that circle and try to complete everything is really, really hard. So thank you so much for that advice. We have been recording this session. We will be putting it up onto the BRC website. So thank you very much. And please, if I can ask you all again, just to fill in that survey, that will help us shape next year's sessions. And please feel free to add comments of what you would like to see in the next sessions. One of the things that Sarah did mention about was about ultrametics, and that is about using non kind of historical means of publishing your research. And it just so happens that Dr. Eileen Tan will be here next week, exactly the same time, talking about social media for academics. And I'm sure she will have some valued advice about using social media for publicizing our research and everything. So thank you again, Sarah. Thank you everybody else for being very interactive and for a great session.